When you think of smog, Los Angeles or Phoenix probably comes to mind, but right now the worst air in the country is actually hovering over Salt Lake City, Utah. And Ben Tracy shows us why it could mean some big changes.
A city known for its clear skies and white-capped mountains is now choking on a heavy blanket of smog. The Environmental Protection Agency says this month Salt Lake City has the worst air quality in the country.
This terrible air causes families like the Fransons to feel as if they're breathing straight exhaust fumes. All 4 of their children have asthma and spend dark winter days at home or in the hospital instead of at school where they belong. These bad air days happen because we live in a bowl. The mountains that surround us create a lid of pressurized air that traps pollution in the valleys where we live. None of us want to breathe this pollution. Utah's bad air puts kids in oxygen masks and brings about 1,000 to 2,000 premature deaths in Utah every year. But each of us generate pollution as we go throughout our daily lives. We wake up to a warm home, drive ourselves to work, or spend a night with friends by a campfire. All of these activities generate pollution that in other areas would just blow away. But in Utah, it doesn't just blow away. So what's the pollution breakdown? Industry accounts for 13%, while consumers drive the rest. This means that only so much improvement can come from regulating industry. Why is this a problem? Because we live in a bowl.
That bowl that traps the dirty air is hazardous to both our health and our economy. No one likes to see dirty air. Utahns earn their living working at ski resorts and tech companies. But bad air days make for empty ski runs and make recruiting tech companies more difficult. So we have a population that is flocking to Utah. The population is expected to double by 2050. So if we have more people coming into this bowl, and all of our valleys are bowls, if we have more people coming into that bowl, we create more pollution. That pollution is from more cars, more homes, more families. And all of these families have campfires. So stakeholders need to focus their efforts on people because the bowl doesn't go away. So in order to understand our solutions landscape, we need to dive that in because stakeholders have to focus their efforts on people.
So we started by interviewing a diverse range of 45 existing players in the system, including lawmakers, regulators, business leaders, public health experts, scientists, and historians. And over the course of these interviews, we discovered and pieced out a vicious cycle that describes the solutions landscape. This cycle starts with the Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA creates new air quality standards when studies reveal negative health effects of pollution at increasingly lower levels. The next step is communication. When Utah fails to meet these new air quality standards, nonprofits in the state launch public messaging campaigns. These do successfully raise awareness, but they fail to convince most Utahns to change their behaviors and reduce personal emissions. So the vast majority of the 1,200 consumers that we surveyed, they did acknowledge that air quality is a big problem, but they were unwilling to adopt cleaner alternatives because most low-emission products don't offer a strong enough value proposition. For example, Luke is your typical environmentally conscious Utahn. He doesn't like dirty air, but when he contemplates buying a new vehicle or changing the way he mows his lawn or even walking to the bus stop in the middle of the winter, it's just not worth it. Besides, even if he does do all these things, his neighbor Kevin isn't going to change, so why should he?
The last step is misdiagnosis. Advertisements are a poor means of communicating complex issues. For example, Kevin hears a message that says, the air is getting worse and you should do something about it. But for years, industry was a far worse contributor than it is today. Kevin looks around, sees smokestacks, and responds with, yeah, or we could make industry clean up its act. Instead of reducing their emissions, consumers like Kevin overestimate industry's contribution. So what do? They put pressure on their elected officials to regulate industry. Elected officials have attempted to provide consumers incentives to adopt cleaner tech, update building code, and expand public transit. But the primary response to this pressure is regulating voters' favorite target, industry. So when this fails to fix the problem, the cycle starts over. This cycle shows that Legislative efforts to convince the public to reduce their emissions results in more pressure being put on the legislature to fix the problem. This never-ending cycle keeps the focus away from the core of the problem, the lack of viable, cleaner products and services.
So how do we fix this vicious cycle? The most effective way to fix the vicious cycle is to meet the needs of consumers. Pressuring or regulating Utahns results in pushback and political gridlock. Instead, they must be won over by creating and highlighting strong value propositions in clean air products and services. Luke wants to buy products and promote regulation that solves the issue. But he has other product concerns: speed, convenience, reliability. And he has other policy concerns: crime, education, and homelessness. He wants to know that his dollars are going to go further than just fixing the air. This comprises the gap that we want to focus on today, namely that most clean air products and services do not offer compelling value propositions to consumers. So while other gaps exist, focusing on this area would yield long-term improvement to Utah's air and fix the vicious cycle.
So our exploration of underlying drivers highlighted key lessons that can be used when designing future solutions. For example, in the 1930s and 40s, most Utahns relied heavily on coal furnaces to heat their homes, and these furnaces generated staggering amounts of pollution. Public emissions were not significantly reduced until gas furnaces became readily available. And the availability of cheap and clean gas furnaces made it so that, did something that regulation and awareness campaigns were unable to do. So this episode demonstrates that consumer products play an increasingly key role in improving air quality. When you build a green product that is useful, regardless of whether it's green, you give Luke an opportunity to overcome his hesitation and adopt the change. So how can we do this? Let's spotlight one of the possible models for change that we discovered in our research. I2E is a venture capital firm, technology incubator, that invests directly in new ventures, but then they help with marketing afterwards. I2E helps these companies to highlight the value propositions that strongly appeal to consumers, and this is exactly what is missing in the low-emission products in Utah today.
We also wanted to obtain a better understanding of the types of value propositions that would cause Utah consumers to adopt clean air products and services. We recognized little research had been done in this regard, and so we conducted 1,200 consumer surveys. One key finding was that people are significantly more willing to adopt clean air products and services if they also help solve other public issues. For example, 61% of respondents indicated they were either significantly more willing or absolutely more willing to pay for a solution if it improved air quality and neighborhood crime. To test this finding, we implemented a solar lighting experiment in the Lakeridge, Orem, Utah neighborhood. Because of the demonstrated link between streetlights and crime rates, we worked with Orem City to install solar lights to reduce the neighborhood's crime rate and carbon footprint. Resident response was overwhelmingly positive and validated our survey findings. People are significantly more willing to adopt clean air products and services if they also promote other public values.
We also studied Daybreak, a thriving community outside Salt Lake City designed around sustainability. We discovered that Daybreak's developers emphasize on high quality of life in their marketing strategy. Evidence again that promoting multiple public values, sustainability, and high quality of life appeals to Utah consumers.
So to transform the lessons we learned into actionable levers of change, we recommend a focused collective effort by stakeholders to develop shared priorities, funding streams, and measurement systems. They would then focus on creating clean air products and services that would meet a more compelling value proposition. To activate levers of change, stakeholders use the following 3 strategies. 1, stakeholders should prioritize solutions that promote multiple public values. 2, public messaging campaigns should focus on promoting the value of clean air products and services. 3, government should work with the private sector to create stronger green technology incubators with a focus on helping clean air entrepreneurs find a fit in the local market.
In conclusion, we've seen that our valleys act as a bowl that trap dirty air. We've mapped a vicious cycle in the solutions landscape. We found that consumer behavior is the major gap that impedes stakeholder efforts. And finally, we've constructed a framework that stakeholders could use to collectively focus their efforts on specific levers of change. In addition, we recommend that our stakeholders create value propositions and focus their efforts on highlighting those value propositions so that behavioral change for consumers is not only possible, but the most rational option. To us that live in the bowl, the choice to change is clear.
Thank you for your great work. I'm curious to know, having done this research, having understood the need for behavior change, how has this changed the way each of you walk in the world and engage with consumer or energy practices?
Me personally, this has been an absolute game changer. Having done all this research, I can't claim ignorance any longer. I no longer am able to say, oh, it's cold outside, I shouldn't drive my car, and then idle while I'm sitting in front of the school waiting for my kids to get out of school. No, I now turn the ignition off. And with our research that we've discovered, the experiments that we've done, all the participants in that experiment said, hey, yes, we could make similar changes. It's not scary. It's not going to come out and bite us. So yes, we can go forward with this because it's now a priority to us. It solves two things at once, which is what our research came back to.
Thank you for the presentation. I spend a lot of time in Beijing, which has a lot of smog, so I completely sympathize and empathize with your predicament. So my question is also about behavioral change and financial incentives, because it is very challenging when you're trying to, one, educate and build awareness about this issue, and two, also actually make people take action. So have you looked around the world to see what are some solutions or ways that can really help people through incentives to build in these habits and behavioral changes?
Yeah, so I'll start with the example we mentioned briefly in the presentation. I2E, they're a technology incubator that started out on a grant model, a government grant program. And the grant criteria didn't align their results to marketability. So a lot of the products that were going through, they just died. And they were great, and they solved a problem that Oklahoma was experiencing, but they never made it to market. So they switched to a venture model, and a venture capital model, I should say. And they required that each entrepreneur contribute 50% or source 50% of the investment. And then they helped them find those investors, and they helped them build marketing strategies and business models that would appeal to the market they were located in, and find those levers and that demand and exploit it, I guess would be a word for it.
And concerning financial incentives, when you look across the country, you can take the EV tax credit, for example. We were talking with a representative from the Fed, and she said that with financial incentives for green products, it distorts demand, and so it makes it hard for green technology entrepreneurs to create marketable technologies and get a good understanding of the market and the demand, because you have all these subsidies kind of muddying the water.
Have you looked at some other options? Like from behavioral economics, we have a lot of nudging techniques, for example. There are new financing models, private ones for green products, all kinds of different techniques. So what in addition to better consumer products, is there that we could exploit?
Yeah, so specifically, if you look at building codes, which is something that we briefly mentioned in our presentation, if you look at building codes, a lot of homes right now, they aren't up to code. So they're in 2006 codes. We need them to be up to 2018 codes. With those, a lot of developers, they're just unaware. So even though Ivory Homes, Utah's largest home builder, has voluntarily agreed to update their building codes, And a lot of these smaller businesses, they just are unaware. And so talking with them, getting key playmakers to come in there and help them create this awareness was one example.
Another gap that we discovered is community designs. A lot of communities in Utah are designed around car commuting, and access to public transit is difficult. So only 2.8% of Utahns use public transit. And if we keep on that trend, in 2050, only 4% of people will use public transit on a daily basis.
And if I may, one of the lessons that we learned from our research was that our participants in our experiment didn't think that it would be convenient to make a change unless there were several value propositions attached to it. So if it solved multiple issues, then they were all for it. And not only for it, but they were willing to pay for it. So as long as they knew that a solution worked, they'd be willing to provide that money and the financials to be able to say, yes, this is something that would work for us. We see value in this. And that, I think, sets our research apart as something that can be applied globally because there are consumers everywhere.
Well done, and it was a pleasure for us to listen to you again. Well done, guys.